Have you ever wondered how a simple, almost romantic idea about shared culture and language could eventually become the trigger for the First World War? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to trace the fascinating, dramatic, and honestly pretty chaotic life cycle of a single world-changing concept, nationalism.
Here's our roadmap for the journey. We'll start with the birth of nationalism, look at the underground clash between conservatives and liberals, and dive into the age of revolutions. Then we'll see how nations were physically unified, check out the visual symbols that tied people together, and finally explore its dark turn into imperialism. Let's jump right in.
First up, Section 1, the birth of nationalism, and the spark of 1789.
Picture Europe in the mid-18th century. There was absolutely no feeling of collective belonging. Nation-states as we know them today, they just didn't exist. People spoke all sorts of different languages and lived under these massive patchwork empires. But in 1789, the French Revolution completely changed the game. It destroyed the monarchy, created a republic, and rolled out a uniform language and administration. So what actually is nationalism? At its core, it's a political and social idea centered on the belief that a group of people sharing a common language, culture, history, or identity should form their own unified, independent state. It sounds totally normal to us today, but back then this was a radical, earth-shattering concept.
Then comes Napoleon and his Civil Code of 1804, which had this fascinating, almost hypocritical dual nature. On the one hand, it was great. He abolished the feudal system, freed the peasants, introduced equality before the law, and even standardized measuring units. But at the exact same time, he imposed strict censorship, completely denied voting rights to women, forced people into the army, and jacked up taxes. But here's the incredible twist. As Napoleon's armies marched across Europe to conquer it, they inadvertently spread these revolutionary nationalist ideas right along with them.
Moving right along to Section 2, Conservatives versus Liberals. The struggle goes underground.
Fast forward to 1815. Napoleon is defeated at Waterloo, and the victorious powers host the Treaty of Vienna. Their main goal? Restore the old overthrown monarchies. They literally sat around a table and carved up the continent. The Netherlands absorbed Belgium in the north. Prussia grabbed huge new territories, including parts of Saxony. Austria took control of northern Italy, and Russia just swallowed up a big chunk of Poland. They physically redrew the borders to trap the genie of nationalism back in the bottle.
This brings us to the new ruling ideology of the era, conservatism. Now, post-1815, this wasn't just about preferring tradition. It was an absolute autocratic crackdown. These regimes favored only very gradual change, if any at all, and they came down incredibly hard on new freedoms. They imposed heavy censorship to completely silence the ideas of the French Revolution. Because of this intense repression, liberal nationalists had to go totally underground. We're talking secret societies just to fight for basic liberties.
And let me tell you, the conservative leaders were terrified of them. Take Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich, the guy who actually hosted that Treaty of Vienna. He called one specific man the most dangerous enemy of our social order. Who was he talking about? Giuseppe Mazzini, a brilliant Italian revolutionary. While in exile, Mazzini founded secret societies named Young Italy and Young Europe. His relentless, burning vision for a democratic republic struck absolute fear into the hearts of Europe's monarchs.
So what were these underground revolutionaries actually fighting for? To the newly emerging educated middle class, liberalism meant freedom on two fronts. Politically, they demanded individual freedom, equality before the law, and government by consent. Economically, they wanted free markets and the end of state restrictions on goods and capital. But we have to point out a massive loophole in this grand vision. When they said equality, they definitely did not mean everyone. Voting rights were strictly limited to men who owned property. Women and men without property were entirely shut out.
Which brings us to Section 3, the age of revolutions, where the idea violently clashes with tradition.
You just can't keep a lid on a boiling pot forever. The tension between the aristocratic conservatives and the liberal middle class finally blew up. Just watch how fast the dominoes fall here. In 1821, the Greek War of Independence kicks off. By July 1830, France is in total upheaval again, overthrowing the Bourbon dynasty. A year later, in 1831, Poland launches an armed rebellion against harsh Russian rule. And by 1832, Greece is officially recognized as an independent nation. The conservative grip was fracturing, and it was fracturing fast. But we need to remember that this wasn't all just grand, abstract politics. It was grounded in real human desperation. The 1830s and 40s saw huge population booms, which led to mass unemployment and food shortages. Take the Silesian Weavers' Revolt in 1848. It started on June 4th as a simple plea for higher wages from their wealthy contractors. By 2 p.m., those desperate weavers marched right up to the contractors' mansions. When they were ignored, they smashed the houses. The contractors fled to neighboring villages, but those villages actually refused to help them. Eventually, the military had to intervene, and 11 weavers were shot dead. Like I said, this was about sheer survival.
That same year saw another massive flashpoint. In May of 1848, 831 elected middle-class representatives gathered at the Frankfurt Parliament to draft a constitution for a unified Germany. They proudly offered the crown to the King of Prussia. His response? He flat-out rejected it, basically saying he wouldn't accept a crown from the gutter of common people. He sent in troops to disband the assembly, and crucially, even though women had actively participated in these revolts, forming political groups and founding newspapers, they got absolutely zero recognition. During this very parliament, they were only allowed in as observers, forced to stand up in the visitors' gallery.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Unifying the Nations. The idea takes physical shape.
After 1848, a harsh realization set in. Idealistic votes and middle-class parliaments simply weren't going to defeat entrenched conservative monarchies. Brute force was required. Germany, for example, wasn't unified by peaceful democratic voting. It was forged in iron and blood by the Prussian chief minister, Otto von Bismarck. He pulled off an incredible military masterclass, winning 3 wars in just 7 years against Austria, Denmark, and France. Thanks to that overwhelming victory, in January 1871, the Prussian King William I was officially proclaimed the German emperor.
Meanwhile, unifying Italy was like putting together a chaotic, multi-pronged puzzle. First, you had Mazzine's underground secret societies planting the initial seeds of liberty. Then Chief Minister Cavour tactfully stepped in, outmaneuvering the Austrians in the north with some help from the French. Down south, Giuseppe Garibaldi took a completely different, grassroots approach, rallying local fighters to push out the Spanish Bourbon kings. Eventually, the Central States yielded, and by 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was officially proclaimed king of a newly unified Italy.
Then we have the strange case of Britain, which played out very differently. There was no sudden, fiery grassroots revolution here. Britain's nation-building was a top-down imposition of power. The 1707 Act of Union literally created Great Britain by binding England and Scotland while actively suppressing Scottish identity and outlawing the Gaelic language. Ireland suffered an incredibly similar fate. Deeply divided between dominant Protestants and marginalized Catholics, Ireland mounted a revolt in 1798. It failed, and by 1801, Ireland was forcibly incorporated into the UK.
Let's shift gears to Section 5, Visualizing the Nation. We're talking allegories and symbols.
Think about it. How do you actually get everyday folks to feel deeply connected to an abstract, newly drawn border? You use art. You use allegories. Take Germania, the female personification of the German nation. Artists used highly specific, emotional symbols to make politics visible to the common people. Just look at her. The broken chains, they represent being freed. That breastplate with the eagle symbolizes the sheer strength of the empire, while the crown of oak leaves stands for heroism. She holds a sword, showing readiness to fight, but it's wrapped in an olive branch to show willingness to make peace. And she stands before the black, red, and gold tricolored flag, the exact flag of those 1848 liberal nationalists. Every single detail was meticulously designed to instill immense national pride.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, From Nationalism to Imperialism, the Dark Turn.
As we hit the late 19th century, the liberating life cycle of our core idea starts to mutate into something much, much darker. We really have to stop and ask ourselves this pivotal question. What happens when love for your own nation becomes a desire to conquer others? The entire focus of nationalism fundamentally shifted. It was no longer just about securing your own borders and independence. It became about proving your greatness by dominating someone else's.
We define this dangerous new evolution as imperialism. It is, simply put, nationalism plus territorial expansion. That deep, unifying love and pride for one's own country became the very justification for expanding empires. It was used as an excuse to strip away the independence of other groups in a highly aggressive pursuit of wealth, resources, and global power.
To see exactly how this builds into a global catastrophe, look no further than the Balkans in 1871. It was an explosive, resource-rich powder keg of diverse Slavic peoples previously controlled by the rapidly crumbling Ottoman Empire. As the Ottoman group loosened, the newly independent, hyper-nationalistic powers of Europe, we're talking Germany, Italy, Britain, and Russia, all desperately scrambled to claim this territory for themselves. This incredibly tense, imperial scramble for dominance created the exact geopolitical spark that ultimately ignited World War I.
Which brings us to a really heavy final thought for you to chew on. If the pursuit of a unified identity, a shared language, culture, and borders led directly to the absolute devastation of World War I, is nationalism ultimately a force for liberation, or is it a force for destruction? It's a wildly complex legacy, and it's one that is still drawing the map of our world today. I encourage you to keep exploring and keep questioning. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.